Hey everybody, Stephen Bogran here from Pro Physique, and today I'm talking about how the body's energy systems work.
My name is Steven, and this is our video about health and fitness things. And I work for Pro Physique, and I am just a guy with a fitness thing for you.
Hey everybody, I hope you've all had a great year to start for 2023. I know I've been a bit gone, as I've been dealing with some health stuff that has made, we'll just say, recording kind of a pain. Case and point. However, things do seem to be getting a little bit better, so let's get back at that YouTube grind and get back to learning about kind of how things work with the body. And so one of the big things that I like to do is try and educate people on the physiology, how your body works, what we know about that. I find that what this can do is, it in and of itself, it kind of gives us a bit of a BS sensor, so that when we hear some things that just don't quite sound right, we can start looking a little bit more in depth, and we don't get caught up in that kind of nonsense right off the bat. The reason that I kind of come up with this idea for today's video is because I got a really interesting question from a client today who said they did essentially like metabolic testing kind of thing that looked at how much body fat they were utilizing. And so there's a couple things that are going to set off my red flag there, which means how much body fat we're utilizing is going to be the really big one. Because how do you know the delineation between fat burned from energy intake and fat that's been set free by lipolysis? It's body fat. Really hard to make that delineation with our traditional metabolic testing. And then of course they were also talking about the percentage of fat that was being used. And so that's always a big one that was kind of confusing to me, because it sounded like they were saying you're burning 100% fat. But are we burning 100% fat? Because that doesn't happen, and this is why we want to talk about that. There are three, count them, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Sorry guys, gals. But there's three main energy systems that we are going to be using throughout the day and for our energy demands and needs of movement. The first one I always like to start off with is the ATP-CP system, or adenosine triphosphate creatine 5-phosphate system. This is the fastest energy system that we have available. It is also going to normally give us the least amount of energy because it doesn't provide as much energy per, we'll say, turn or usage of it. And that essentially means that we're breaking off that third phosphate group, letting that energy flow, boom, very quick, very easy. The second one is essentially our carbohydrate energy system. And call it whatever you will. This is where glucose comes down and ends in either pyruvate and or lactate, depending on the energy demands and the intensity of exercise. The last one is our Krebs cycle, or oxidative phosphorylation. That is fat metabolism. Fun stuff. But at all points in time, our body is using all energy systems. Now, what does that mean for fat versus carbs versus protein? Well, guess what? At all points in time, our body is using all macronutrients for energy. It's going to be utilizing protein. It's going to be utilizing carbohydrates, and it's going to be utilizing fats. The good news is those things can shift in terms of percentages that they're giving to your overall calorie demands and needs. But we also want to remember that overall calorie demands and needs are going to be the big picture we want to pay attention to for body fat loss or for weight gain, for kind of finding that maintenance, loss, gain number. But let's talk about some of the things that can influence how we are seeing carbohydrate versus fat metabolism happening, and which one is maybe going to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting on specific activities. In general, that fat metabolism is going to create more ATP or energy than the carbohydrate system per turnaround and go. So most of our low intensity activity is probably going to have more of those calories given to it from fats. As that intensity of exercise comes up. So that might mean we're running faster and we're passing that point where the oxygen and the fat metabolism can keep up, now carbohydrates is taking more, and that's kind of helping to add more of those total calories to that exercise demand. If we look at weightlifting, again, that is going to be higher intensity, typically going to be a more carbohydrate driven exercise. But that doesn't mean fat is not involved. We are still burning fat and still utilizing fat as an energy source throughout all of these things. So a lot of times what can happen is we get caught up on this, oh, but I'm burning this much more percentage of fat. But that does not correlate to I'm burning more body fat or I'm burning more calories. And this is where we want to be aware of that and how the body works. And the reason is because we may get told, we may get caught up that we have to pay attention to all these things to maximize how much of the energy is coming from body fat. But if we just end up burning less energy, does it matter? So there's two things to think of here. And first and foremost is what we kind of talked about at the beginning of the video, which is, am I burning body fat or am I burning fat? Because to burn body fat, we have to be in a deficit. We have to have something that we call lipolysis happen, which is where our body takes that stored body fat, frees it up into the bloodstream, and then utilizes it as fat. So even if you are burning more fat because you're eating a high fat diet and you're doing lots of low intensity exercise, if you are still in a surplus, even if we're breaking down that body fat and freeing it up into the bloodstream, guess what happens? It gets restored as body fat because we are in fact in a calorie surplus. The same thing, of course, can happen with carbohydrates in a calorie surplus. Yes, that glucose can still get converted and stored. Yes, that's absolutely what's going to happen. So we want to pay attention to being in that calorie deficit, burning more calories than we intake. We do want to be aware of kind of how we're performing exercise because these things do matter. Your recovery matters. Your ability to stay adherent to that exercise matters. Your ability to enjoy that exercise. All these things matter. And they're going to be kind of a foundation for whether or not we're able to be successful in the long term with what we are doing in terms of our approach to either lose body fat, gain muscle, or even just maintain a healthy body composition for ourselves. Getting into that kind of nitty gritty of, oh, that body fat percentage, that percentage of fat that's utilizing has to be maximized. That's not necessarily the case. And we've seen that in multiple studies. We've seen that calories in, calories out matters more so in terms of something like maximizing fat percentage than anything else. Because at the end of the day, the one thing we have to remember is that if we eat more calories than we burn, we are in a surplus, which means our body is likely and apt to store that, and that will be stored as extra body fat. So we have to make sure that we're not getting caught up on some of the minutia and details and getting sold on something that's not actually doing us benefit. For a lot of people, this means, okay, so if I eat high fat, I don't have to worry about it because I'm burning more fat, and all of a sudden, I'm going to see all of my body composition goals achieved. Not necessarily the truth. Again, if we're in a surplus, we will gain that fat, we will put that on as extra body mass. All this to say, just understand all of these things are happening all the time in our bodies. And when we understand what's happening in our bodies, we're able to hit our BS sensor, bump, and then we can start asking questions. Then we can start looking at more of the details and saying, is this reasonable? Is this realistic? Or is this something that we're just maybe being used to market towards? Or is this something that's really not as important as other people would lead us to believe? And that's it. I'm going to end it right there. It's good to be back, YouTube, and I'll talk to you all hopefully very soon.